I'm Anya, and welcome to my channel. I don't know how to give an introduction, so we're just winging it for now. Today I wanted to talk about something that I haven't talked about in a while, and that is the Dreams of Gaia tarot deck. I have done a few different videos on the Dreams of Gaia tarot deck. Today, I thought it might be fun to talk about the Major Arcana. I think it's the Major Arcana of this deck that actually makes a lot of people consider this deck to be both a tarot deck and an oracle deck, because the Major Arcana in Dreams of Gaia is much different than the Major Arcana in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, and I do have the Rider-Waite-Smith deck next to me to do a little bit of a comparison. I'm going to be using the Pam's Vintage Tarot, which is still the standard Rider-Waite-Smith imagery, but it is not the standard Rider-Waite-Smith deck in that the colors are different. The Pam's Vintage, if you're not familiar, is a smaller size deck from a standard playing card deck. I would call it a pocket edition because they're perfect to just grab and go on the run. But I also like the coloring of the Pam's Vintage because there's a coloring stain over it that just makes it have this sort of like antique, ancient sort of look. So I figured I'd get started by just doing a brief rundown of the Rider-Waite-Smith. I'm gonna try to stay brief. So the Major Arcana for the Rider-Waite-Smith is something that most people are very familiar with if you're familiar with tarot. It starts off at 0 and goes to 21. So there's a total of 22 cards in the Major Arcana. And it starts at 0 with the Fool and ends at 21, the World. Some people might say that the journey actually starts with the Fool. The Fool starts off by, taking sort of a leap of faith that they are walking off of a cliff and they have no idea what's gonna come next. They're just trusting the journey. So a lot of people see that sort of progression from the Fool all the way to the World as this walk, this journey that the Fool is going on, and all of the characters they're meeting along the way. And people who envision the Major Arcana to be this journey of the Fool might look at the last card, card 21, the World, as being this culmination of the journey the Fool has been on and where the Fool has ended up, by becoming this fuller figure because of the adventure that they have gone on and the trust that they have placed in the world itself, But we're here to talk about Dreams of Gaia. Dreams of Gaia has sort of similar ideas and images being portrayed, but there is a definite difference. So let's just start off with numbers, right? Dreams of Gaia has 25 cards in the Major Arcana as opposed to the 22 in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. Like the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, it starts at 0 and goes to 24, starting at Choice and ending with Faith. Now, the way Raven Phelan has broken up these cards, they are all sort of grouped together and having different meanings and symbolism for each of these different groups. So I'll talk about each of the groups, but then also try to do a tiny bit on what I see when I look at the cards or when I work with these cards. So the cards don't show all of the individual differences of the Rider-Waite-Smith, but we might see some shared meanings and symbols and ideas throughout them. So for example, in Dreams of Gaia, you'll have Desire, which has a similar meaning to the Devil. And there is still the idea of death and rebirth. It's actually called Death and Rebirth in Dreams of Gaia. Raven Phelan herself says you can see the Emperor and the Empress energy in the Mother and Father of Dreams of Gaia. Similarly, you can see hints of the Hermit in the card Wisdom. So there are similar elements, but it's just been done in a different way. Raven Phelan herself describes this as a tarot for a new age, and in some ways it kind of is. I still consider this to be more of a tarot deck than I do a tarot and oracle deck, and people have the right to think whatever they want about whatever decks. To me, this feels more like a tarot deck than it does a tarot and oracle deck. But let's just go through the cards. There are 4 different groups that Raven Phelan has grouped all these different cards into. So the first group has just one card, and that's the first card, card 0, which is Choice. Choice we can kind of just see as this starting point, this open position of decision making and recognizing that all of our choices, any path we can take, is gonna lead us somewhere else. Raven Phelan has said that this is probably one of the most important cards of the Major Arcana and of the whole deck, because it's a reminder that we have choices in everything we do. Even doing nothing is a choice. But all of our choices have individual meaning and power. That's why it stands alone. It reminds us that we have these decisions, and we can kind of see some hints of the Fool in that too, can't we? The whole idea of making the decision to take a step forward and go where we feel guided to, and not being afraid of, the potential pitfalls and cliffs, knowing that we don't actually know what's going to happen until we get there. We could walk off the cliff and fall right into a beautiful bed of flowers. There's a lot of different occurrences that can happen depending upon the choices that we make, and we can see that in the Fool and we can see that in choice. But it also serves as a good reminder that we are always one choice away from something completely different, and there's power in that. That's something that the Fool also uptakes in their journey, deciding to take the step instead of sitting back down on the ground and planning things out. That's the power of choice. And it's a good reminder for those of us who forget the power that we have over our own lives and decisions. From there, we go to stages of life. And this goes from card 1 to card 8. So stages of life, I look at these cards as new ideas, new perspectives, new ways to sort of look at life and the world around you. These cards serve as a reminder that there's ways to change your perspectives. There's new ways for you to look at life and to react to life. There's always going to be a new stage in your life. But these cards also remind us that maybe each stage we go to requires a different iteration of ourselves. So we start off with card 1, which is the child. The child perspective that I see is a brand new vision of, I don't want to say naivete, probably because I'm now uncertain if I'm saying it correctly, but it's not really naiveness so much as it is freshness, newness, excitement, recognizing that there's so much potential and greatness in the world. Think about the way a child looks at the world. They're not cynical, they're not judgmental, they're not constantly questioning the bads, the wrongs, the negatives. They are just going into life with excitement of possibility and still a belief in magic and the things that they can do and create, and the belief that everything is good. Most people who grow out of childhood look back at childhood ideals and say that they're silly, they're foolish, they're too optimistic, and they are very naive. But there is a beauty to that perspective that reminds us to trust and to realize that things aren't as bad as the world makes it out to seem. It's so much easier for us to focus on the negative. So the child perspective can be considered a call to remind us that the world isn't as bad as we always think it is. There is goodness to be found. And if we can adopt the idea and the belief that there is goodness in the world and that we can create magic if we want to. We can create better lives for ourselves. We can act on our own goodness, which might bring out the goodness in others. That, to me, is the perspective of the child. From the child, you move on to the maiden and the youth. And these are the starting points of our break into the masculine and feminine worlds. So you start with the maiden. The maiden is the feminine perspective of this new youthful perspective and understanding, wanting to explore the world and experience the world and understand who she, as the maiden, who she is. But the maiden is often looking at it from terms of an inner sort of perspective, in my opinion anyway. She's looking to understand herself, yes, by having experiences and understanding herself, but she's also looking inward to figure out who she is. Whereas the youth is often going out into the world and having these different sort of adventures, like leaving the pack and just going off on their own and exploring the world and having this be how they open their minds up to who they are. They're both two different ways to experience the world. As I want to stress for each of these stages of life, when we're talking about the development of the masculine and feminine parts of ourselves, it does not mean that men go off into the world to understand who they are and women, stay at home and do meditation and things like that. It means that each of us should be doing these different aspects of the journey to understand ourselves. Women should go out and explore the world and meet new people and have adventures to understand who they are and what they are capable of and can accomplish. And men should be open to working through things like meditation and journaling and their emotions to understand themselves as well. It's a balancing act that we need to be experiencing to understand the fullness of ourselves. I will also say, in terms of, a more intimate and deeper journey, I feel another aspect of the Maiden is not just the exploration of her inner self and her emotions, but also a sensual side of experiencing herself, which a lot of people, I think, are a little uncomfortable with, because we think of a maiden, we think of youth, and we think of maybe adolescence, and no one wants to think of adolescents exploring themselves or their bodies or sharing it with anyone else. But we also have to remember that adolescence is a stage where our bodies and our minds, our brains actually start that process of development into adulthood. The whole physical transition of adolescence is to prepare our human bodies to be able to mate and ultimately produce offspring at some point. And with that, I feel that the maiden, part of her journey is that equal exploration of herself. It's the realization of having a physical body that you can explore and enjoy as much as utilize for growth and work and development. You can use your body for creative purposes, to write, to paint, to create art, to study things, to learn things, to explore the sciences and the mathematics, and to solve the problems of the world. But you can also have your body be a vessel for enjoyment. And that's not something that we are very open to the idea of women doing, especially our young girls. And I'm not encouraging the idea of doing this exploration as a way of engaging in sexual activities with various people, but more that understanding that there is nothing wrong or sinful or evil about our bodies. And that is a lesson that people need to be learning at adolescence, because that's the stuff that follows you your entire life. So that's how I see and envision the maiden and the youth. Moving on from there, we go on to the mother and the father. Now, the mother is a figure who is sitting in her own throne. We can see she's heavy with child. Father is equally sitting in his own throne, but you can kind of see the differences in the way they sit. The mother, her posture, her seated stance, it looks very welcoming, very open, and very inviting. And that is the sort of embodiment of motherhood, the idea of sacrifice for the well-being of others, the idea of giving and kindness and openness. That is femininity in and of itself. And at motherhood, it's the full potential of it, because if we consider what women go through in order to give birth, it's very much a sacrifice for a woman to carry a child through to birth. It's a sacrifice of body, of comfort, of, in some cases, maybe her own well-being, because there's a lot of physical pains and discomforts and hormonal stresses. There's so much that happens during pregnancy, and we often forget that pregnancy is a sacrifice that women make in order to have a child. And many women are happy to do that, and that is a blessing and a wonder for the world. But we should not forget that it's not a walk in the park. It's not easy. And it's a sacrifice that women make, not just for the 9 months of pregnancy, but for birth and for several months to years after that, when we consider things like breastfeeding. So that's why this whole idea of femininity in the motherhood state is about giving and sacrifice and the recognition of we can make the world a better place through this kindness and openness and giving nature. The father, on the not reverse, but the sort of dual nature of that, is the strength and the defense and the protection of family, and recognizing that he has the role to play of protector and defender of this important space. It is his role to not just protect the mother and the sacrifices that she makes, but also to find growth and fairness through this. And a lot of people might be uncomfortable with that idea. That does not mean men rule over women. It means that the woman has an important role to play in this role of giving, but that can often be taken advantage of. There's a balancing act here to play of the woman being the giver and the man being the sort of protector and defender of that. And I don't really mean men do this and women do this. I'm talking about more masculine and feminine energies. That doesn't mean that a woman is not occasionally uptaking the role of the father father to be this figurehead who takes in all of this knowledge and tries to find fairness and balance, who acts as a figure of authority and defense. Basically, you see the masculine energy as this energy that is there to ensure that nothing is being taken advantage of, but to act as a moral authority, to know that you have the power to stand up and act on what is right and what is best for all, so that no one is taken advantage of. Without the masculine, the feminine might be more prone to constant giving of itself, constantly offering itself to the benefit and value of other people, because that is a desire of the feminine nature, to provide comfort and compassion and caring and provide that sort of safe space for everyone to feel wanted and included. It's beautiful to want to incorporate those things into the world, but if you're not careful, that can be taken advantage of. And that's why the masculine is so important, to come in to balance it out, to ensure that it's not getting taken advantage of. But without the feminine, the masculine can become too overbearing and start to dig too much into the me and my protection and the protection of myself and that which is under my protection. You basically just need this balance to ensure that protection and defense isn't becoming something that's overbearing, but you also need to make sure that the feminine nature isn't being taken advantage of as well. And that's why you do need this balance of both. From there, you go to the Crone and the Sage, and I actually do genuinely love these cards. Ravenful Land has compared these cards to the Magician and the High Priestess, and I can see that in some ways, but in other ways, I kind of just think they need to stand on their own as individual cards. What I think about the High Priestess isn't necessarily what I think about for the Crone. Again, we're talking about stages of life, and this is a completely new evolution for the feminine into this Crone stage, because we have gone from motherhood, which is a lot about giving and sacrificing of the self for the benefit of the others, of the overall goodness of the group. When you get to the Crone is an energy of taking care of yourself and recognizing that you have given so much in life. It's time to start saying yes to yourself. And I love that. I love that because it can be like when you're working a lot with feminine energy, it can be so hard to say yes to yourself. It's so easy to say yes to everyone else and constantly say no to yourself. But when the Crone shows up, it might be a time of saying yes to yourself. And again, I stress, this can be for men or women equally. There are plenty of men in the world who will say yes, yes, yes to other people, to helping, to being there for others, but then can't take the step back to say yes to themselves, or perhaps they say yes too many times to other people to the point where they're getting taken advantage of. That's such a struggle to find a happy balance, and that is why it is so important that we have both masculine and feminine energies at work inside all of us, to be able to say yes to others when it is okay and appropriate, to say no to others when it is appropriate as well, but to remember, we need to say yes to ourselves. That is what I see of the Crone energy, and I don't necessarily see that as much in the High Priestess. The Sage, equally, I don't necessarily see him as the Magician either. I see the Sage as someone who has gone on this journey of exploration from the youth to the father, these two very different lifestyles of going out and exploring the world and seeding his wild oats, so to speak, and, you know, having just so many life experiences and stories, this time of adventure to a time of settling down and slowing down. And by the time the masculine gets to Sage, there's so much wisdom to share and give to others, but also the recognition that people need to come to their own understanding and wisdom all on their own. I see the Sage as sort of like the grandfather that sits around and tells stories and you are gaining so much from the stories that he's sharing of his life and of his experience, but he's never telling you exactly what to do, right? That's how I see the sage. So a bit different than the magician, but still just this equally important role of the journey that we can all go on, right? From there, after that is death and rebirth. I love that this is the death and rebirth card because it reminds us that death is more of a state of transition, that if you want to make a big change in your life, then you have to let go of something else. Something has to be released, to die in a sense, in order for something new to come. Look at all the seasons. Things need to die in winter in order to be reborn in the springtime. We, each individual human being, lives a life like that if we choose to see it that way. So death and rebirth is just a reminder that if we want to continue growing and expanding ourselves and changing who we are or stepping up into different levels of our life, it requires a death so that we can be reborn into that. So that's what these stages of life are. And sometimes I see them come up if like I need to change my way of thinking about a situation, which, you know, I use tarot a lot more for like personal development and growth and looking into the things that I'm struggling with. So I see these cards as kind of a way of saying, maybe it's not the situation, maybe you need to change the way you're thinking about the situation, you know?